All right, so one of the favorite projects for my kids to build is these river coasters. So if you're new to epoxy resin, great project to start with. Super easy to make. All I'm really gonna need here for materials is some 1x4, which as you know is only 3.5 inches wide. That's why it's really important not to go with anything smaller than this, because if you get too much smaller, well, you know, it's not gonna really fit a cup on it. So grab a piece of 1x4, let's get started. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do here is we're going to cut our 1x4. You can see here, I found the best piece I can find right now, and this has some twist in it. But over the course of what I'm going to need, I can get a pretty straight shot. So get straight lumber when you can, but if there's a twist over a long board, not the biggest deal, because you're only gonna be using a section of it. Now, typically you want your coasters to be square. So if you think about this, this is 1x4, so this should be 3.5 inches across, all right? So that means going the other direction, you need 3.5 inches per coaster. So you gotta think about how many coasters do you need. So typically my students end up making a set of 4, but some of them, they're an only child maybe, they only want 3. Some of them multiple siblings, they want 5 or 6. Just take 3.5 times however many people you need, and then add an inch to it. And the reason I'm saying to add the inch, a couple of reasons. One, the kerf. So if you don't remember what kerf is the thickness of the blade. It's gonna make that cut. So every time I make a cut, I'm gonna lose about 1/8 of an inch. So let's say I wanna make 4 coasters, 3.5 inches times 4, that'd be 14 inches. If I cut this exactly 14 inches, by the time I get to that last coaster, I've lost a good chunk of it. It's not gonna be anywhere near square. So 3.5 inches per coaster, add 1/2 of an inch to an inch. You should be fine. Also, that extra inch gives you a little more room to make that last cut. I get nervous when people's fingers get too close to the miter saw. So I'm gonna make a set of 4 coasters right now. All right, so 3, 6, 9, 12, plus the 1/2 inch times 4, to be another 2 inches, 14. I'm gonna cut a piece at 15 inches. And again, when I look at that 15 inches here, if I flatten this board out, I'm pretty straight for that 15 inches there. There's nothing to worry about. Down at the other end, we get that wobble and it gets crooked. So get your measurement, let's make a cut. All right, so if you watch that cut, you'll notice I did something that I didn't think was all that unique, but somebody commented on my last video and they said, you're the only person I've seen use the miter saw correctly. You left the blade down until it stopped spinning. I thought everybody did that. That's common sense, that's safety for a few reasons. One, when I make that cut, blade is spinning. If I lift it up while it's still spinning, especially if it's a smaller piece of wood, a lot of times that piece of wood will go flying. We've had students working on things and it'll get sucked right into the vent. It'll shoot up and then it's gone, poof, just sucked away. Also, why would I want to expose a spinning blade? Yes, I have my retractable guard here, but why take that chance? So when you use the miter saw, please leave it down until it stops spinning. I know it takes some patience, especially if you're making, 20 cuts, but it's worth it, safety. I still got all my fingers, all right? All right, so what I'm gonna do now is I'm basically going to lay out my river. And some people don't do this. Some people just grab a router or grinder and they go to town. I like to kind of get an idea what I'm going for. And I'm not gonna do anything crazy, all right? I'm just going to basically draw a little design. Something kind of like this. And I've seen people, branch off and do little things. That's up to you. You just gotta remember you're only gonna be seeing 3.5 inches of this at a time, right? So all that fancy stuff is gonna get mixed up among a bunch of them. This is a pretty simple, straightforward, easy to follow pattern here. So I just did a little river. You can see there, a little hard to see. There we go. All right, something simple. Now we get a router. All right, so what I'm gonna do here is I'm going to be using just a small router to do this. I've seen it done with a grinder also. If you clamp this down, use a grinder and just kind of grind away at it. I think the router is a lot easier. This is what I'm gonna go with. Now, you need to clamp this down. I'm just gonna bring it over the edge of the table. I'm gonna put 2 clamps on it. I'm actually gonna work on this side here. Easiest way to show you. Now you are gonna have to do this in 2 quick parts because obviously if I have this side clamped, I can't run the router through here. That wouldn't make sense. Now, big thing is when you set your router, you're not trying to go super deep here. I have this set to maybe 1/4 of an inch, all right? So you can just adjust it. Right there would be flat. I'm not trying to go all the way through the wood, all right? I'm not trying to sit here going full through. I'm keeping this project simple. So again, about 1/4 of an inch through there, all right? I'm gonna lock it in place. And all I'm gonna do is, I'm using just a straight bit here, and I'm just gonna router this line. And the cool thing is, if it's not perfect, it doesn't matter because you're never gonna see that line again. This is a one-of-a-kind coaster. These are unique. Nobody's ever made this exact coaster before. So nobody's gonna know that I missed the line. So I'm gonna turn it on, making sure to keep everything obviously away from anything that spins. I'm gonna turn it off, never set it down while it's spinning. And you can see, even with the 2 clamps that started to move a little bit, it's just, I'll use a bigger clamp next time. Now what I'm gonna do is spin it around. And I'm gonna come from the air side. And I'm gonna basically just meet these 2 lines up, or I can drop in here and pick up where I left off. Doesn't really matter. I'm gonna kind of show you how I clean things up a little so. So if you see here, it's a basic river. Now, let's say you have little spots you don't like, things like that. You can very easily just go back in with that router. And I'm like, okay, right here, I don't really like the way that edge looks. It looks a little jagged. Maybe I'll kind of smooth it out a little bit. Just go back in with your router and kind of clean up any spots like that you don't like. Hey, 10-second timeout. If you are enjoying this video, take a second, like it, hit that subscribe button. There's a lot more tutorials on the way. Let's get back to the build. Okay, now if you have some spots in here that you don't like, you can just go back in and clean them up. All right, I'm gonna turn this on. I'm gonna kind of drop it in. Now, there's one more little spot I don't like here. Beautiful. And honestly, that wasn't even necessary. This is just me being kind of picky right now. All right, but I've got my basic pattern here. Now, let's get this ready for some resin. Okay, so one thing you might notice is after you run that router, you get some, little frays and straggly pieces going on here. Just grab a piece of sandpaper, take the 30 seconds that it may take, and kind of clean up that edge. Literally, probably 30 seconds. I'm just going through, almost done already, a couple little spots right here. And I'm just gonna clean it up. And the reason I'm doing this is because if I'm making a one-of-a-kind set of coasters here, I want them to look pretty nice. I don't want the resin to get messed up in here. All right, and you see there's a little bit down at the bottom, but guess what? That's gonna be covered with resin. So we're basically ready to go. And one of the reasons I love this project is the mold is so simple. All right, so if you're someone who does epoxy, you know molds can be a pain in the butt. For this mold, I'm just gonna grab some painter's tape. Again, because we're not pouring super deep, remember, that's all I did, not even 1/4 of an inch. So what I'm gonna do is take that tape. Should have done this before I put my gloves on. And I'm just gonna tape that edge. Wrap it around a little bit, make sure it's nice and tight. That is all you're going to need. Do that to each end. Again, tip of the day, deal with the tape before you put your gloves on. Oh, and wear gloves when you're dealing with resin. Always. Stuff is disgusting. All right, here we go. Look at that beautiful mold right there. Now we mix our resin. So for this, I'm going to mix 2 ounces. That's honestly more than I'm going to need. It's just the smallest amount with the cups that I have, I'm comfortable accurately getting. So I'm just using some bar and tabletop epoxy for how thin I'm pouring here. This will work just fine. And again, I'm just gonna be going to 1 ounce of each. So if you look at the cup here, this is a 1-to-1 ratio, so I'll go to 1 ounce and then to 2 ounces with the second one. I always pour the thicker material first, because if you look, this stuff can be like glue. All right, coming out. So we'll let this get going. Again, I'm going to go to 1 ounce of this. And honestly, I could probably, if I had a better set of cups here, just go with about 1.5 ounces total, so 3/4 and 3/4. But these cups start at 1 ounce, so that's what I'm going with. All right, so we have 1 ounce of that. And again, always make sure you check your directions on your epoxy. This one is a 1-to-1 ratio, so easy enough. Get my pour right there. And for this particular epoxy, it says to stir it for 3 minutes. So the students always say this is the hardest part. So 3 minutes, go. Three minutes later, here we go. All right, so next thing we need to do is I'm gonna add in a little bit of color and then just stir it a little bit more. So, put a little bit of the color I want. You know, a little bit goes a long way. Now the more you put in, the deeper the color is gonna be, but you really don't need much. I'm just gonna stir that in. You'll see my color start to shift here. It's my first time using this color. It looks like it's gonna be pretty cool. All right. And you don't need to stir it a ton now. Just make sure my color's all in. Make sure you're scraping around the sides, getting all that in there. All right, I'm gonna bring it over to my coaster. So you can see we've been doing a lot of pouring lately. We have quite a messy area. It drives me a little crazy. Just, as I said, wear gloves because everything sticks. All right, you see, everything sticks with epoxy. All right, so I'm stirred up. Now, I'm going to pour. This is pretty simple. I'm just gonna kind of come from the side here and just fill it in. And if you get some on the sides, that is okay because you're gonna sand this later. Now, you can see I'm actually a little bit over the edge. Again, not a big deal. I'm gonna let this sit for a second. It's kind of moving into the cracks, making sure everything looks good. Once I know it's good, I'm gonna go grab the heat gun. Okay, so what I'm gonna do now is I have my heat gun. I'm gonna hold this up probably about 6 to 8 inches above, and I'm gonna turn it on. I know it might be a little hard to see here, but when you pour, believe me, you'll see it. There's a lot of bubbles here, all right? Those bubbles are not your friend, so we are going to destroy them with this heat gun. So I'll turn it on and hopefully you can get a good shot here. You should see them start popping. All right, so as you do that, you'll see just pop, 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 pop over and over again. Keep doing that until the bubbles are gone. I'm gonna wait about 10 minutes. I'm gonna come back and check on it again, and I'm gonna make sure I hit the bubbles one more time. All right, just came in to check this out. You see, I love that color. So it's a little high here, and then it goes down here and it's a little bit low. Not the end of the world, because I knew I'd be doing some planing on this. But what that tells me is that the table wasn't perfectly level, and that is because, well, there's dried resin all over the place. So try and keep your resin area as clean as you can when you're working. Remember, this board also had a little bit of a twist to it, so that could be a factor. So I'm gonna take this to the planer. If you do not have a planer, start sanding. All right, so we can see here is I ran that through, got rid of the highs and lows. And a lot of people, they get to this point and they're like, oh my God, what did I just do? Because it doesn't look all shiny and pretty anymore. That's okay, we're gonna get back to that. Only reason I ran it on this side once, normally I wouldn't do that, but I was hoping it would help get rid of a little bit of the twist if I ran it through both sides. And I'd say it helped a tiny bit, but there's definitely still some twist in this board. Again, hopefully over the coasters though, that will get lost. So now, it's time to sand. All right, so I don't have to take off a ton here. I believe I have a piece of 120 on here. I'm gonna do this, get it down level, and then depending how it looks, I may come back with a piece of 220 also. All right, so looking a little better. My planer leaves some nasty swirls in it because students tend to sometimes forget to take nails out of wood before they send it to the planer. So there's some chunks in the blade. But a little sanding, that looks a lot better. I'm gonna grab a piece of 220 and sand just a little bit more. All right, fresh piece of 220, here we go again. All right, now as far as the sides go, I may hit them real quick just for a second, but I'm gonna be taking these coasters to the router later, so that's gonna affect the edges a bit, but it'll affect the top, so real quick. All right, so now, we'll just, we're sanded down. We're smooth, my resin's nice and level. Now we're gonna go cut this up into coasters. Let's over to the miter saw. All right, so I'm over here at the miter saw and I wanna point something out. I saw a thing that said 9 out of 10 people can't read a tape measure. So I do a lot of these projects without using a tape measure. So I'm gonna show you both ways here. If you don't have the ability to set up a block on your miter saw, you're gonna check how wide this is. So this is 3.5 inches. So I want my coasters to be square, so I'm going to measure down 3.5 inches and I'm going to make a mark. Now, an important note, when you make that mark, when you cut with the blade has thickness to it. So it's gonna take away that roughly 1/8 of an inch. So wherever your mark is, you don't cut right on the line. You cut right next to the line on the far side. So if my coaster's here, I'm cutting on this side of the line. Hopefully that makes some sense. If the line is here, my blade is just gonna catch the outer edge of that line. Now, if you can set up a block, here's the easy way to do this and to make sure all your coasters match. So, I use blocks whenever I can. It's easy to make things consistent. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna set it right up against the blade. All right, then I'm gonna take a block, I'm gonna slide it right up against that. Get rid of any little scrap wood. A little piece of scrap wood in there can make a big difference. All right, and I'm gonna clamp that board right there. So now what's gonna happen is when I go to cut, if I just slide this up until it hits that block, and I cut that, it is now a square. Slide it, cut it, slide it, cut it. All right, so make sure we're good. All right, let's make some coasters. All right, now this last one. As you can see, I don't have a whole lot of room here. And I know plenty of people that would hold it here and they're gonna cut it like that. And you know what? There's a good chance you're gonna be okay. However, I teach high school students and they know their hand does not go within roughly 6 inches of the blade. If you look on your saw, like here, there's actually this wonderful thing here saying, hey, your hand should not go past there. So I say, why take the chance? I like having my fingers. So I'm just going to use a push stick. And what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna hold this right here, and I'm just gonna use my left hand to cut. All right, so there's my coasters. I made my board a little extra long. And it's actually, I think, big enough to get a 5th coaster out of. So, same thing. Boom. All right, so I'm over here at the router and I want to point something out. This is a set that someone made, I think last semester. And while these look really cool, they took off quite a bit here. Now you gotta remember, these are 3.5 by 3.5. If you take off too much, it's gonna be difficult for a cup to really fit on there. So for like this one, bottle of water, that fits on there just fine. But if you have a larger cup, you're really gonna be pushing it, keeping it on there. So my suggestion is, if you wanna router them, go ahead. I'm about to router these, but I'm not gonna take off as much. I had a student working on these earlier today, and he was working on this one, and you can see, still routered the edges, but he took off a lot less. So it still has that cool look, but there is a lot more room on there, where like a coffee cup or something could fit. So I'm gonna set my router to right here, and if you don't wanna mess your project up, I highly suggest grabbing a piece of scrap wood, testing it first. Now, I know this is on the setting this was done with because I helped the student do it. So, I'm gonna run these through. When you're using a router, a few things. If your fingers touch that, you don't have a finger anymore, so don't touch it. Seems simple. I wanna router the face of the coaster, so I'm gonna flip it so that side is down because the router is coming up from the bottom. And I'm going right to left. The way I hold these is just like this. I grip it like that, and I use this hand down. That way my fingers are nowhere near the router, and if by some chance, my finger comes off or something, I'm not pushing in that way. I'm not pushing in towards the blade. I always tell the kids, it's like you got just a death grip on this thing. So I'm just here, and I'm gonna slide it right to left. I'm gonna turn it, right to left, turn it, and I go through twice. All right, so let's router this. Look, got the nice routered edge, gives it a fancy look, but it's not taking off so much that you don't have room. I've got plenty of room on there in the flat top section. So, let's do the other one real quick. All right, so now I'm over here and I'm getting ready to stain. And I just want to kind of make sure, you know, all the chunks are off of here, you know, as it was going through the router. Some dust, random things. There's some spots of epoxy, chunks that got stuck on there. So I'm just making sure everything's kind of cleaned off. Now, if you're not staining it, obviously you don't need to do this step. And a lot of the students get nervous here because they're like, well, I can't stain it because I might get it on the epoxy. It's going to wipe right off of there, so you don't need to worry about it. All right, so I'm gonna grab my color. Important note, you don't wanna shake stain. You always wanna stir it. All right, so I've got my little stirring stick here, and you'll see as you stir it, the color change quite a bit. All that dark pigment at the bottom is gonna get brought up. All right, and the easiest way to stain is simply just with a rag. Now I'm going with a kind of dark color here because I think it'll look good against this blue. So I'm just gonna dip it in there, and I'm just gonna wipe on the stain. When you look at it, I'm gonna show you here. You see it doesn't look very good on there. But I'm gonna take my clean end, kind of wipe everything off, including on the epoxy, and that looks a whole lot nicer. All right, so I'm just gonna toss this onto my little drying rack over here. Whoop. Well, good thing they're durable coasters. And I'm just gonna do that for all these. Now, the longer you let the stain sit on there, the darker the color is going to get. Or you could always do multiple coats. So I'm just going to let it sit on there for a minute. All right, last one is stained. Now I'm gonna let this stain dry. I really like that color. I like how that came out, so I'm not gonna worry about doing another coat. But once these are dry, I am going to treat them, and I'm just gonna use mineral oil. So I'll be back as soon as that stuff is dry. All right, so the stain has dried. I personally like to use this stuff, just a basic mineral oil. I think this whole gallon was like 25 bucks, so it's not expensive. Now these are coasters. So it doesn't have to be something food safe like this. I mean, you may just use a regular clear. I'm just in the habit of using this. I know that it's easy cleanup, it's non-toxic. So I just dip a little bit on here. What I'm gonna do, just wipe it on there, and you can see that shine start to come out. And again, the epoxy is really starting to pop a little. So this stuff's super easy to use. And again, any clear will work because your food shouldn't really be touching a coaster. But that's all I'm gonna do. So I'm gonna knock that out for all these. And I've seen people actually just soak like coasters and cutting boards, because this is the same thing you use on cutting boards. Or I've seen people just dump this stuff into a bin and just soak things in it, which you're welcome to do. It's just the way I like to do it. All right, so you can see that gives them a nice shine, and this is one coat. Some people like to do multiple coats, really personal preference, but super easy project. Again, I think these look awesome. I love the color, easy, one of a kind. Every time you make these, it's something unique. Be sure to like, share, subscribe if you enjoyed this build. Plenty more on the way. You have a great day.